Eric and Tara, do y'all remember your class songs?
Well, curiously, I graduated 8th grade the same year you graduated high school, so I had the same class song as you did.
Just for a different school.
Yeah, for 8th graders. My high school.
That's not even the beginning of the road.
No?
I look back now and I'm like, what do you mean the end of the road when you're 18? What the hell sense does that make?
That was about that for me. That was my last class song.
Wow. I don't know that we had a class song. I don't remember anything like that. I graduated 2 years after Brent and Richie, and I know Ace of Base was really popular. I was into heavy metal back then. Even
their class song.
Oh,
that she wants
that
is another day, man.
That was
every guy.
And this was Catholic school. This was Catholic school.
Oh, jeez. Wow. Yeah. That's got to be cringing too when you're like a heavy metal fan and then Ace of Base as everybody's walking around. I saw the sign.
And then in junior high, all my friends were into New Kids on the Block, and I'm like, what? This is just weird.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Yeah. It was challenging. I held strong. I kept my head together.
Terrible.
Yeah, Ride the Lightning was big when I was in high school, and then you go out and the class song is "End of the Road" by Boyz II Men. But I also liked R&B, so I was kind of Laurie Edwards just did DJing. I should find the picture of it, but I'm a big fan of Belle Biv DeVoe's "Poison."
Yep.
Oh, and there's a chance that the moderator of our 24 Hours of Past session, has the video when me and Eric put on costumes, and we were. There's a chance that he has the video, so I asked him to see if he could send it over because I would love to see that.
Thomas says, "You got the right stuff, Tara." If you remember, at least that they sing that. I actually know a lot of their songs because that is what all my friends were into.
Oh God! So those of y'all who have technical questions, heaven forbid, if you have technical questions, you can put those into the questions pane, and we'll get to those first come, first serve. We'll start the official webcast in about 3 minutes.
Now I have to remember SQL. This is awful.
Yeah, none of our questions are going to be about SQL. It's Microsoft is all into open source. I keep glancing over at Twitter. It's going to be MariaDB, MongoDB. Those will be the questions.
I can't wait for SQL Server to be open source. I think that's going to be a great day.
In SQL Operations Studio, so the new one, in their FAQ, they go, one of the FAQs is, will SQL Server Management Studio be open sourced? And the answer is no. It's like, whoa, okay. All right.
We can't have you people seeing that code. That is bad.
Yeah. Probably use undocumented stuff, all kinds of things. Richie, is that a stuffed football?
That is a stuffed football. I've got a basketball one back here somewhere.
So what? Yeah. Why do you have? Do the cats play with that?
Well, I could nail one of my cats right here and just, bah!
Yeah,
No,
temptation must be.
Just picked it up. I think shortly after I graduated, and then Lucy got me the basketball. So.
Back in '88, or?
Well, thank you very much. No, class of '97. Thank you, Brent Ozar.
God, 30-year-old stuffed toy must be. Whew. Man.
It's like 20. Come on now. Stop it.
There's a really good.
You're still older than me, Ozar. You're still older than me, man.
Grandpa Ozar. There's a really good podcast, still untitled, is Adam Savage's podcast. He does, one of the guys from Mythbusters, and he had a guest on this week who does restoration of things like Gremlins from the movies. So there's a huge collector market from people who like all the Star Wars Cantina costumes. But they're all made in really crappy foam, and they just disintegrate when they're stored in the light. So people pay tons of money to have their old Gremlins and Star Wars costumes restored. Like that's something else.
No, when we were in Seattle last, when we were at the retreat and on the boat thing, we went to the Museum of Modern Pop Art or whatever.
Yeah.
And they had a Muppets exhibit that you had to pay extra into. We're like, Muppets, take my money, please. I'll be all up in that. And they did have the dark crystal Muppets, and you could tell that they were starting to get deformed because they were the foam latex, and they were disintegrating as well. I guess they had taken some steps to stop that, but they weren't going to do a full restoration. And that was like, oh, wow, oh no, it's melting. It's like, oh.
But it's kind of appropriate because it's just like us. We're getting old. We're also not as good as we originally. Someone go in and do a little.
I don't think I'm melting. I look like I'm inflating constantly.
The struggle is real.
More salt and sitting.
Well, our lifestyles and our retreats don't help either. We're not doing well with that. All right, let's see. We'll go ahead and get started. Doug asks, a few days ago, a rogue query, wonder if he called it Rogue One, caused TempDB to fill up, jobs to fail, and notifications to be sent. We figured it out and fixed everything. I like the way how he says this because it was probably his query based on his. We figured it out and we fixed everything. Last night, the database server rebooted itself to install some Windows updates, and when it came up, when it came back up, it sent several more notifications with the timestamp from the day of the issue. What would cause SQL Server to hang on to notifications and send them after the reboot? Yeah, go ahead.
My guess would be if database mail couldn't send because maybe it's on the same drive as TempDB or something.
That was my guess too.
Yeah.
That's what you said. That. Go ahead.
Guy named Kenneth Fisher, blogs are SQL studies, I think. He has a blog post about queries to help you troubleshoot database mail stuff. I've used that a couple of times. It's a pretty good post. I'm going to stick the link for it in chat. Give me a second to find it.
Find it in the show notes. Kelly says, training videos question, are the high availability and disaster recovery videos going away? I can still get to the page, but the link isn't on the DBA training videos page. Yeah, our DBA training subscription now includes the senior DBA class instead, which, because of course they're my modules. I like the newer ones better, so I like the senior DBA class better. You can still get to the HA and DR. It's just that we've kind of deprecated those, so I don't push them as much on current subscribers. Thomas says, it's fun to watch Richie when other people are talking. I think it's fun to watch Richie at all times. That's why I have the webcam installed in his office.
Wait, what?
Richie, what do you do when we're not on the webcast? When you code, do you dance around too, or how do you?
Well, all morning it's been like this, and it's been this, and it's been this. And I finally figured it out right before we started. So which means I'll have another half hour of, oh my God, what was I doing? And then this, and then all this. Yeah.
And that's due to working in the cloud, right? All the cloud stuff.
Brain works and there's, and what I'm working on, it's been a lot of code actually written. And so it's like, okay, if I want to do this, what needs to change around here? And then you go off and, you do the change, and then you see all the unit tests break, and then you've got to go back and fix all them and create new unit tests and go through that cycle. And usually that takes about a day if it's a medium-sized change type stuff.
That sounds unpleasant.
Yesterday, medium-sized change. It was a full day fixing all that stuff.
Let's see. Thomas says, have y'all looked at Docker at all? And if so, what do you think about it?
Not my favorite pants. I don't like the pleats.
The belts aren't bad, though. Yeah, we don't, only because, so what we end up doing is, for the most part, people bring us in when the SQL server's on fire, and we have to turn it around within 3 days or tell them what to do to turn it around within 3 days. And because we tend to be a little later on the adoption curve, like people don't come to us with brand new servers, they're usually in place for a year or two. Docker isn't, it might be production ready for all we're concerned with, but we tend to get brought into really high value stuff. Docker tends to be throwaway projects, like you just spin up a SQL server and make it disappear. I would adore it for unit testing, SP Blitz cache, stuff like that, if we cared enough to write unit tests, which we don't.
That's not true.
They don't.
I wrote a whole bunch of unit tests for SP Blitz cache.
That's true.
So
that's true.
As soon as you want some units, I'll send you them.
I should be the one that actually knows more about Docker than anyone else because it's more of a Devi type thing, and I know like nothing. I brought in a couple of presenters down in Miami to talk about it, and at the end of that, I'm like, I still don't have a good concept of how this thing works. So,
and there was, when it first came out, there were some gotchas around persistent storage. Like the idea was you don't persist data and log files inside the Docker container, you persist them somewhere else, like out on a network. Right. And that can lead to some performance gotchas there as well.
Yep.
What else do we think about it? I adore it. The idea of containers are pretty awesome. Usually I want the SQL Server to stick around. I want the app servers to just get completely rebuilt all the time for version testing.
Yeah, and I've been playing with serverless, which is completely like the next phase of Dockerless and containers, right? So containers is like all running on a server, and we just throw all that idea away, and we just run it whenever it needs to run, and that's it. So that's the main reason why I haven't really messed with containers, because I'm past containers. I'm on serverless. That's what I'm talking about.
There's I want to go off on a rant on serverless. So somebody says this week, they're like, well, you wouldn't call Ubers carless. And I'm kind of like, well, actually you do. If you use Uber all the time, you don't own a car. Now there's a car involved. You just don't have to own it or service it. Wes says, I know that Kendra Little uses Docker quite a bit for her demonstrations. Kendra's a Mac person like me, so like in theory, you would think I would love SQL Server running in a Docker container. The problem is that I really like to show things using SQL Server Management Studio, at which point if I'm going to run Management Studio, I might as well be running Windows because I got to run it at this point. So,
but now with SQL never mind.
John Starrett pops on Twitter and defends Microsoft. He says, Operation Studio is still in preview. They've got to start somewhere. I'm sure actual plans will show up soon. Yep. We're going to get them next year, right, Richie?
That's how I all my queries. I'm sure the plan will show up soon. just hang on a little longer.
You got to start somewhere. You might as well start with select star from table.
That's true. You're proving my point here. It takes time for this stuff to come through. And I'm not going to get all excited for something that's pre-beta. Just sorry.
Especially when it's free. You know, I know what they're going to come back to because I already submitted my first feature request through GitHub. I'm sure they're going to be like, great, the source code's over there, Brent. Good luck. At which point I'm going to say, do you really want me to submit a pull request? Because I don't even know what this is written in.
Is that all C++ stuff? I'm assuming.
I have no idea. I would think it would be, I doubt it's C++ because it's cross-platform. It's probably, I bet they want something really high level and abstract, like Java.
It's running Java.
It does feel like Visual Studio Code. What's that written in? It's the JavaScript? Is it like Electron?
No. Well, Visual Studio is written in C++, but it could
code.
be
Visual Studio Code.
Oh, code. Yeah, that's
right.
that's the HTML type.
I'm Googling.
JavaScript.
Visual Studio Code built on Node WebKit.
Wow.
Node Electron. GitHub's Electron.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
I know it was some web thing that they put inside the desktop.
The rest of us, our eyes are kind of rolling back.
Yeah, I feel okay with that web thing.
Ian says, my boss wants our applications to read-write through different servers located in different places to the same database. Where could I find something to help me talk him out of it? We've already got distributed reads with availability groups, but he wants distributed writes too.
It's really easy because at one of my jobs, they asked this question, the business asks that question every 1 to 2 years. And all the IT department had to do is go back to the SAN vendor. What is the price point to be able to achieve that? And that was it. It was always, at least $1 million. I think the price point was like $2 million that we were always quoted. So it's a lot of money to be able to achieve this. We were talking about SAN replication and probably synchronous, and it has to be in the same, data centers because it's going to be latency otherwise.
The other gotcha is, so what happens when it breaks? So if you're going to write to 2 different servers in 2 different places and replication breaks, because it has to, sooner or later something's going to break, and you have different data in 2 different data centers, is that okay with the customers or not? And if the answer is no, then there you go. Thomas asked a question earlier when we were talking about open source. He said, do you prefer Mongo or Maria? Oh, so Richie, if we put a gun to your head and said, we're going to use a different database, Not that we're not using SQL Server to begin with, but if we made you choose between MongoDB and MariaDB, which one would you choose?
Probably Maria. It's an offshoot of MySQL. It's more standard and whatnot. Depends on really what we're writing. I mean, if it's more of a kind of object-y type thing and NoSQL-y, then you go Mongo. Otherwise, if it's more of a relational type thing, you go Maria. I still haven't figured out how to report off of MongoDB yet. No one's really found it out yet.
Oh, I should put that. This isn't really a family. Yeah, no, it is a family webcast. I was going to open it just for the YouTube crowd because I'm like, well, I don't know if YouTube would censor us for having. So for those of you who are listening, there's a classic joke on how do you query NoSQL database. So just search for, did you go tell me to query MongoDB? I think it was MongoDB, or was it just NoSQL? Might have even been Cassandra.
Don't remember.
Dell says, we have a database about 20 gigs in size. Our largest table is a heap. That table accounts for over half the size of the databases, and the indexes are taking about 4.5 gigs of space. He writes on for several paragraphs, and he says,
should have been your first warning. Is the length. We need to have like a beginning and end metric on here. Like if the beginning of the question and the end of the question are a certain distance apart, they...
He says, but the punchline of it is, I'm trying to reduce the size of my database. Well,
only 20 gigabytes though. I mean, why are we bothering with this?
Yeah,
that's small.
Don't put files in your databases. No blobs, bro. I mean, come on, man.
So these are 32 gig thumb drives. I've got a handful of them. I've actually got a whole bag of them here. There's probably 2-3 terabytes worth of USB drives in here. Just go put another USB drive in the SQL server and you should be okay.
I'll sell you a really cool thumb drive. It's a
Wow, that's got to be full of viruses.
Yeah, you have no idea. This thing is awful.
It's funny when you... Go ahead.
No, you guys are joking. Go ahead.
When you picked it up, I thought it was going to be a dental floss. That's what it looked like.
Right, that's what it looked like at first, yeah.
You could write your backups to this tape.
At the end, Dell wonders why the database size didn't decrease after he shrunk it, and it's not going to decrease because a heap is the table and the clustered index is the table. The size isn't going to change here. I mean, maybe a little tiny bit, but this isn't for size reasons. Switching a heap to a clustered index pertains to, okay, go ahead.
There can be though, because heaps don't deallocate empty pages when you do deletes, right. But that's, in most cases, it's such a tiny percentage.
Yeah. Switching from a heap to a clustered index is more about, is your system, high writes or high reads? Is it about, are you having problems with forwarded records, in the deletes? Most OLTP tables, or really all OLTP tables, in my opinion, should have clustered indexes. It's staging tables, ETL type stuff, where you may want to have a heap.
Or if you kind of know your data patterns, if you know you're like doing only write only and you're not doing a lot of reads against it, then
and that's what I tell my clients when I'm looking at Blitz index output in the heaps and the extremely high forwarded records. They ask, well, should we rebuild the heap or should we add a clustered index? And that's when we scroll to the right in the Blitz index output and we look at the usage. Is it heavily writes as compared to reads? And if it is heavily writes, then go ahead and just rebuild your heap on a regular basis.
Michael says, I work with an ERP system that is all heaps, 12,000 plus tables. I'm SAP, I'm going to guess. SAP.
Oh, is it SAP all heaps?
I think so. I think SAP is all heaps. Man, it always seems like the bigger the system, like the more enterprisey, the worse the database is.
And I recently had a client that was using SAP's Business One, which is completely different than SAP. SAP supports RCSI, Business One does not. There were a lot of issues with Business One, and it all looked like it had been around since SQL Server 2000 days. I mean, just some bad stuff in there.
Michael follows up with a name. He says, don't say it publicly, but it's Acme. No, just kidding.
Michael just went, no!
He panicked. Yeah, what are you doing?
It's Joris Business One. What?
Dude, he's the guy that bought it. I lied.
Let's see. Lee asks, I have a vendor that put a max size on their transaction log file. I shouldn't be laughing, Lee. I'm wondering what kind of problems this could cause for our SQL server. We just got it installed a week ago, so no problems yet.
Well, what's the max size on it? Is my
Oh.
first question.
I don't have the answer. I'm sorry.
Well, I know you don't.
That's it. Yeah, and why he says 90 gigs.
90.
Oh, well, if you run out of that 90 gigs, and you're going to start seeing some funny errors.
You're down.
Maybe it's to keep you honest. Maybe it's to keep you taking log backups. I don't know. That would be a fun way to like put a gun to someone's head and say, no, you take log backups. You don't, buddy. Don't you rebuild that index. You only have this much space. You go over this, that's it.
Yeah, I would wonder, you check the size of your biggest index and make sure that you're not over 90 gigabytes, because if you try to rebuild that guy, you could definitely run out of space there.
And whatever you do right before you go on vacation, don't type begin tran, lock your workstation, and go home for the weekend. That would be bad.
I would be nervous about having an application where the vendor put that in place, because I wonder about their, quote unquote best practices and how they've set up the server. I would start looking at your SQL Server instance settings and see if everything's at the defaults.
I have a bad feeling that one of their customers filled up a drive once, and so this was their answer was, well, we can't ever let that happen again. Thomas says, I'm migrating 3 instances that are currently on a cluster. I'm not allowed to upgrade from 2012 yet on these 3. Are availability groups ready for prime time with the latest service pack and cumulative update? Oh my goodness, I think he's talking about 2012. 2012 availability groups. Yeah, Tara's our availability groups person by far.
And all of my availability groups were on SQL Server 2012, and we did not run into the issues that you were about to mention. I can't remember what those issues were. But doesn't one of our things say, if you're going to use availability groups, to start on 2014 or higher because of something with 2012, and whatever it was, it's like, oh, that's not. I ran fairly large systems on the availability groups in 2012 and did not have issues with it. I know Stack Overflow did. That's different.
My only thing, and this is kind of a personal preference, my only thing is when you lose the primary, until another primary comes up, the databases disappear from Object Explorer. You can't query them on any other replica. So like your readable queries just fail. Now, is that a showstopper of a deal? I don't know, not really. If you're just using it for failover, you're going to bring up a secondary anyway, so it's not such a big deal. But
and the readable queries are only down for say 30 seconds, because these failovers are quick in AG, so maybe even 15 seconds.
As long as it's automatic. If it's an automatic failover,
yes.
Yeah.
And
go ahead. I was going to say, I think the bigger deal for me would be which Windows OS you're on. Like, I wouldn't want to be on Windows Server 2008 or whatever it says.
And you say that, but that's what my systems were when I first deployed, and still we were okay. Now, my last job, we were on Windows 2012 R2, I believe, for those availability groups. But I would wonder for Thomas's question, why migrate off the cluster? What issue are you having that you want to get rid of the failover cluster instance here? For me, I wanted to get off of it because my environment that first went to availability groups, I wanted to get rid of transactional replication, which we were using for reporting. And hey, there's this new feature called availability groups. It offers HA, DR, and a readable secondary. And I was like, oh, I had failover cluster instances. I had asynchronous database mirroring for the DR, and then I had transactional replication for reporting. So for me, I was like three features gone, and one of them is transactional replication. So what are you trying to solve by migrating off FCIs?
he follows up by saying his hardware is going out of warranty on the cluster.
So I would stick with FCIs, honestly.
No. Let's see here. Samuel says, I'm trying to convince my sysadmins to build our production SQL servers with more than one core as standard. They want to build with one core and increase CPUs as necessary. In your experience, what would your add?
What one core?
You
don't
laugh,
laptops have more?
This is actually what VMware's best practices recommend for running SQL servers.
That was a long time ago, though, wasn't it?
No.
Is that still?
It still is.
Oh, wow.
And the most recent virtualizing SQL server book that we reviewed on our blog said the same thing. I'm like,
You can't even, I mean, so obviously these aren't Enterprise Edition servers because you can't even license less than 4 cores on Enterprise Edition.
If you license by the host, you can. So you license the host and then run all the, I know. Yeah. I understand where these VM admins are coming from. It's just that they're wrong.
Yeah. I would run my stuff in the cloud if I only needed 1 core. I mean, honestly, why even, host stuff for such small stuff these days?
Yeah, maybe it's a Docker. I don't know.
I guess my question would be, 1, are they living in a state where marijuana is illegal? 2, have they been drug tested recently? And 3, I mean, do they smoke it as they're sitting in their cube? I don't know, but it doesn't seem right.
They must be like mining Bitcoin with all those other CPUs. they must have a side hustle on that server if everyone's just getting 1 core. That's absurd.
I would just ask him, do you expect the servers to be unresponsive during backup in CheckDB?
Yeah.
Because I want to be able to keep taking backups and running CheckDB without the entire server falling over. Dorian asks, what do y'all recommend for long-term backup storage, disk, tape, or the cloud? I recommend that the sysadmins handle that. I suck so bad at that.
I don't have a recommendation of one or the other. I would just say as long as it's redundant, that's what I would like. However you can make it redundant, that's what I would prefer because you don't want to lose one and then be out all your old backups.
Do they still have zip drives? Are they pretty good for backups?
Super stable. Yeah. You just listen for the
solid.
When you hear the clicking, that means they're
clicking.
working.
That's right. You got to hear click, 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 click. Everything's fine with the drive. Good.
Oh, we're old. Sri asks, how do you patch always-on databases? So Sri, just to be careful, I'd be a bad person if I didn't mention this. Call them availability groups databases, just because there's people out there who are kind of about spelling and all that. Do you go through Windows Update, or do you just download and install and use the cluster services? Oh, how do you guys like patching availability groups?
I don't.
There you go.
It's fine. It's fine.
It's not that bad. Yeah.
Just fail over and patch, and whether or not you use Windows Update or something else, that's dependent upon your organization. Some of my organizations, they did use Windows Update. Sometimes we would use System Center or whatever it is, SCCEM, and it would pre-download the updates on the server, and then I would just have to click on the little bubble that would appear and install it and do my reboots and everything. So, I don't know, whatever your organization uses for Windows Updates is fine by me.
I just wouldn't push them out automated without a human being there because they have no respect. They're like the honey badger. They don't care if a backup's running. They don't care if CheckDB is running.
Now, you can get sophisticated. I know you guys aren't going to like this answer, but you can get sophisticated with patching and use PowerShell to be able to determine, somebody launches a PowerShell script and does all the failovers to, one node, launches the patches on the other node and does the reboots and then the failover. So we were working on that at my last job. It got deployed fairly, not too soon after I left. So I'm sure that they've got that all squared away. So you can get pretty sophisticated with patching.
I like that answer because someone else is doing it.
Yeah, I didn't do it.
It's all automated. Ooh, go to bed. See you in the morning.
I was always nervous. I think we had it in place for like maybe 3 months, and whoever was on call when the patches happened to hit, that's who would have to click on it. I was like, oh, please don't break.
Oh, God.
Like, oh, someone's on PowerShell? Cool, I'm drunk. I'm unavailable.
Those PowerShell people are kind of like CrossFitters and vegans. Yeah,
yes.
You know that they use PowerShell because they're going to tell you, right?
Right.
Yeah, all about it.
That's good.
We could solve global warming with just a little bit of PowerShell.
It's like the worst Tinder date ever. You're swiping through and you see a vegan CrossFitter who works with PowerShell. You're like,
oh. Like throw atheist in the mix and you're just never going to hear the end. Oh boy.
Trifecta!
Dating advice from Brent Ozar Unlimited. Avoid the vegan PowerShell CrossFitters who don't go to church.
Beliefs, really. As soon as someone has beliefs, tough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at that point, do you just delete the app? I mean, or you just throw away the phone? I mean, whichever was easier, I guess.
Told you to never right swipe me here. Jim says, I've got databases with VLF counts ranging from 65 to around 1,000. What's a good number of VLFs and what's a bad number of VLFs?
Bad number is when the number is really high.
And what does high mean? What is really high?
I can only tell you what I've experienced and when I actually learned about virtual, VLF. So this was about 10 years ago, doing Microsoft patching every month for that company. And every time I had to reboot a lot of servers. And so I would just connect to Management Studio and see if the instance was up, and then I'd move along to the next server. And about 15 minutes after I rebooted this box, I'd verified that everything was, the instance was up. The app seems like, oh, we can't connect to the box still. And so I went to Object Explorer and looked at the databases, and in horror, I saw this database was in crash recovery still. And I looked at the error log, and here it is, the crash recovery phase 1, 30%. You see all these logging messages. And this system happened to be an extremely critical system that had 5 nines of availability SLAs. And we were in a maintenance window, so it was kind of okay, but it was not expected for that kind of downtime in a maintenance window. It took 45 minutes. I was so close to, I was on my hands and knees praying to the crash recovery gods, and I was really close to opening up a case with Microsoft, but I kept hesitating because even for a severe, what is it called, crit sit these days? A crit sit, it takes an hour before you speak to someone. It's like, I hope this thing is up before they answer the phone. And so this is like at night, and then on Monday morning I contacted our Microsoft engineer, our PFE. And he's like, oh, what does DBCC log info show? And 45,000 VLFs on this database, because this was like a 7 terabyte database. And I think that probably the auto growths were fine at some point, but in the past they had been really small. And so it got into the situation. And so, once you fix it, you're good to go, usually, as long as you fix the auto growths. But yeah, so 45,000 is a bad number.
I ran into kind of a mirror situation where I was trying to restore a 5 terabyte database that had about a 500 gig log file, but apparently all of the VLFs were like the biggest possible VLF that you can have, so that took a really long time to read through too. So it's not just the number of VLFs, it's the size of the VLFs. There's a whole lot of stuff to think about.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was backing up a database. No, I never did any of that stuff. No. No, doesn't ring a bell.
As far as numbers, I could just tell you from experience of looking for bad VLF databases, that if your database, your transactional log files say around 100 gigabytes, you may be able to get away with 200 VLFs just based upon the shrinks and auto growing back out. But there really is no number. But 200, I wouldn't use that as my threshold unless all my transactional log file size were really small.
I think in SP Blitz, I want to say we warn you at 1,000, but even that is just to give you the heads up of, hey, you should consider doing something about this at your next convenient time. It's not even that urgent.
Yeah, I actually had a recent client that had 75,000 VLFs, and so that was one of their pain points, was to ask about it. And it's like, ooh, I know this topic. I can tell you exactly, because crash recovery was taking 30 to 45 minutes. I was like, oh, I've experienced this. I know exactly what that is. I can help you.
Kush asks, if you have a 2-node active-passive failover cluster, aka a single instance failover cluster, does high CPU use on the active node cause a failover?
I've never seen high CPU use do it. I've seen out of memory do it. So like I would imagine that there's some crazy race condition when CPU gets pegged at 100% that would cause a failover cluster node to say, no, let's not do this here anymore. But
I wonder, because I've been called on clusters that were pegged at 100% even after an hour, and this was like on a Saturday. That's why I remember it, because it's my personal time, and it was still pegged when I logged in. So I don't know that there's anything, because after an hour you think if there was going to be a failover, it would have happened by then. So I don't think that high CPU is one of the triggers.
Yeah.
And then the last one we'll take, let's see, Joe says, I have Management Studio 2017, Management Studio 2014, SQL Server Data Tools 2014, and SQL Server Data Tools 2016.
Why is this the last one?
Should there be any issues if I am careful upgrading my code? Will I run into any problems?
Not if you're really careful and you have a lucky rabbit's paw and it's next Tuesday on Mars and I don't know, you pet a homeless guy twice on the way to the office.
Hold your left leg out the window.
at my last job, we actually had to have machines like this because we had SSIS packages and we had SQL Server 2008 servers and 2012 servers. So we had to install various versions of the data tools, and not necessarily various versions of Management Studio, but the data tools, Visual Studio. And it was, sometimes people would have the wrong Visual Studio and it would work on their machine, but not when they deployed it to production. So you basically needed a chart to tell you on this server, this SSIS package needs to use this Visual Studio and data tools. So it was a problem.
That's why I'm glad I'm out of the SSIS game. That was, it's the worst. The worst.
And 2 words for you, virtual machines. Build VMs with each one with its own different version.
Well, nowadays you just say build the Docker container, right? That has all that stuff on it.
And that's, you might say that.
Yes, I'm just saying that. I'm supposed to say that. I'm a dev. I've got a contract saying I got to say this kind of crap.
Yeah. Enjoy your Docker pants. All right. Well, thanks everyone for hanging out with us next week at the next office hours. Adios, everybody.